So I want to invite you to imagine that you live in a culture where arranged marriage is a thing. Now, you know as a church that we're all about honoring different cultures and the good in different cultures, and so I'm not necessarily knocking arranged marriage. However, I would imagine that most of you are thankful that you don't live in a culture where arranged marriage is a thing. So I want you to use your imagination. Imagine that you are a single person and you are about to have an arranged marriage with someone you've never met before. All right, and there's no way out of it, all right? This is gonna happen. You've been notified about the arranged marriage, and you've never met your spouse, and you're getting ready to meet him or her, all right? So I want you to put yourself in the shoes of that person. And the friend of your spouse comes ahead of them to meet you. You've never met the future spouse that you're being arranged to meet, but their friend is coming. And you have an opportunity to have a conversation with the friend of the spouse that you have been entered into an arranged marriage. What do you want to know in that conversation? Imagine that you have an opportunity to talk with a friend of the spouse that you've never met before. What do you want to know? Think about the urgency of that question, right? You want them to tell you all about your spouse, that you're going to get married. Well, what kind of person are they like? Are they kind? Are they attractive? Are they smart? Are they fun? Do they have a good sense of humor, right? This is a person that you're getting ready to meet that's going to change your life, and they're coming to be present with you. Who are they? What are they like? As we look in the book of Exodus, in chapters 33 and 34, what we have here is somewhat like a wedding ceremony. Right? In Exodus 33 and 34, God has brought his people out of Egypt through the wilderness to Mount Horeb, where God is entering into a covenant with them. What is a marriage? It is a covenant between two people. It is a lasting relationship. It's a significant, formal, deep relationship. And God is calling his people to meet with him at the mountain so that he may enter into a sacred covenant with them. God is present with them in a special way. And as we read the story today, as we see God speaking to the people and entering into this special relationship, what we have an opportunity to see who this spouse is, who God is. We get to see his character in a new way. So really what today's passage and what the sermon's all about is deepening your appreciation for and knowledge of who God is. That's what today is all about. Now, some of you might say, yeah, but I know God. I've been walking with him for some time. Maybe you grew up in church. You heard the Sunday school stories, all the things. You're like, I know God. Well, I want to invite you to take another look. Because I don't know if you've ever had an experience of hearing someone's story or hear someone tell a story, maybe from their upbringing or something about their lives, and you're like, I never knew that. Like, for example, one of the things that I love about being a pastor is I often get to hear people's stories, testimonies, just kind of life stories. Something we often do when someone comes into the church. We're like, hey, tell me your story. Tell me about what was it like growing up in your household, whatever. I get to do counseling, same thing. Among staff, among leadership, right? So, for example, I think I probably heard Karan's story probably about a dozen times, right, in different contexts, right? It's a wonderful story of Karan, love it. But what's cool about it is every time I hear him tell a story, like something else pops up to me. It's like, oh, either I never knew that, or, man, I wasn't listening hard enough, or I didn't appreciate that enough, some aspect of his story. So what I want you to do, and I want us to do, as we listen to God communicate aspects of who he is, I want you to listen for something to jump out to you. Maybe I never really appreciated that aspect of who God is. Let's pray that the Holy Spirit helps us to deepen the appreciation. As God is present here in this passage, let's see who this present God is. All right, so we're going to start in verse 1 of Exodus 33, which Darrell read earlier today. And the first thing we see about our present God is that he is faithful. He is faithful. The Lord spoke to Moses, go up from here, you and the people who brought you up from the land of Egypt to the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. Okay, so God is talking to Moses, and Moses exists some 400 years after the patriarchs were alive. Who are the patriarchs? Is these people listed? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if we were to continue the lineage, it would be Joseph, Jacob's son Joseph, right? And we know that the Israelites were in Egypt when Joseph, Jacob's son, entered 400 years before they were finally delivered here. So what does this have to do with anything? By God promising and alluding to the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he is reminding him that he is a faithful God. He's a faithful God. The promise that he made not a day ago, not a year ago, not even a decade ago, not 100 years ago, the promise that he made 400 years ago, he hasn't forgotten. Now, the reality is, you and I, right, we might make a lot of promises. How many promises have you broken? How many broken promises have you been hurt by in your life? God never breaks his promise. So look at it, jump down to Exodus 6. You see this here. The Lord passed in front of Moses, and the Lord, he said this, the Lord is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, remaining faithful love to 1,000 generations. Y'all, we live in a faithless world, and yet we serve a faithful God. You know, one of the most famous hymns that some of y'all may have heard growing up is "Great is thy faithfulness," right? And the words of "Great is thy faithfulness" go like this: "Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with you. You changest not, your compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou wilt forever be." God doesn't change. He is faithful yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I remember several years ago when going through a hard time in my life, and it just felt like every single day I had a different kind of emotion. You know, you asked me on Monday, "How you doing, Dave?" "I'm doing great." You asked me on Tuesday, "I feel like my world is over." You know, you asked me on Wednesday, and I'm like, "I feel like I got energy again." And then Thursday, I'm like, "I just want to stay in bed all day." Right? This is like my emotions during this particular time period. It was just day to day, moment to moment. And you know what? It was in that moment that I appreciated, I think for the first time, how God never changes. You know? Because I am all over the place. I don't even know how I'm doing most of the time. But God is a rock for us. The Bible calls Jesus our sure and steadfast anchor for our souls, y'all. Because the reality is, it's not just our emotions that change, but our circumstances change, our health change, the seasons change, the economy changes, the government changes. We live in an ever-changing world. We need something and someone to anchor us down. Jesus is our sure and steadfast anchor for our souls. Because our present God is a faithful God, right? And by the way, as we go through this list of attributes of God, my goal, yes, I would love for your knowledge of God to grow, absolutely. But more than that, I would love for your heart to be more excited about who this God is. That's why we're doing this. All right, next in our list, from this passage, God is not only a faithful God, but he's a merciful God. In verse 2, God says, "I will send an angel ahead of you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites." Darrell, that is a difficult list. You did a great job. "Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey." Okay, why does that show us his mercy? Okay, because at this point in the story, if you were here with us last week, you know that what's just happened is a crisis. Because God, the same God who's been faithful for 400 years and beyond that, he's a faithful God, and he is showing his faithfulness by rescuing his people out of Egypt. And again, after again, he is showing how much he cares for them, how close he is with them. All right, he gives them not one plague to send them out of Egypt, but he gives them 10 plagues. And finally, they are no longer enslaved peoples. They're freed. And they get to the Red Sea, and they think again, "Oh, we're going to die now." And God parts the waters. He sends them through, again delivering his people. And then the Egyptians run after them. They think, "Oh, we're going to die." God delivers them again with his faithfulness as the walls of the Red Sea come crashing down, and the Egyptians are no more, delivered from his enemies. And then they're in the wilderness, and like, "We don't have anything to drink." And then God gives them water from the rock. And they're like, well, thanks for the water, God, but now we don't have any food. So he gives them fresh manna every day. And they're like, yeah, but it's just bread. We need something with a little more protein. All right, so I've got some quail coming for you, right? And then the enemies gather around, and they're like, God, we're going to die again. He's like, when will you ever learn? And so he protects them from the enemies, and he wipes them out. Again, after again, after again, God provides for them. And then Moses is gone for 40 days up on the mountain. It's too much for the people. As we talked about last week, the people committed idolatry. And despite the fact that one God, Yahweh, delivered them every single minute of every day, as they're walking in the wilderness 3 months later, they're like, yeah, we've had enough. We can't handle this anymore. And so they have Aaron make an idol, a golden calf, and they worship the golden calf, which for God, in God's eyes, that type of rebellion and idolatry, it's adultery, right? It's the people being unfaithful to their spouse. How does God respond? Verse 2, he still provides for them. Despite the fact that the people have just abandoned him. They have just worshiped another God. They have just committed adultery with another God. And yet he still promises to send them into the land flowing with milk and honey. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. Despite their unfaithfulness, God promises generously to bring them into the promised land. Verse 3, it says this. While he gives them the promised land, he says, I'm not going to go with you. Why? Because you're a stiff-necked people. Otherwise, I might destroy you on the way. Right? So on the one hand, we see God's anger burning here because of the sin of his people. But he's saying, in mercy, I'm not going to be with you because it won't be good for you if I am. Right? I don't know if you've ever experienced this with somebody. As a parent, sometimes my kids are like, Dad, just go away. I can't, be near you right now. And I feel that way sometimes as well, right? There's sometimes I'm like, hey, I need you to go to your room because it's not going to be good for you to be around me right now, all right? That's the kind of anger I feel based upon what you have done, all right? And we've all been there, right? God is saying that, hey, it would not be good for me to be near you right now, right? Because in your sin and my holiness, I will wipe you out. So you guys, go on ahead. I'm going to be here. All right? God is merciful, even in his anger. In verse 5, the Lord came down in a cloud. So what I'm doing, by the way, is I'm jumping back and forth between Exodus 33 and Exodus 34 because it's one story. And while I didn't want Dyrell to be up here reading for 20 minutes and then me preach a sermon, so we did a little excerpt from Exodus 33, but we're jumping back and forth because it's all one story of Moses going up the mountain, God revealing his glory, and him coming back down. All right? So now we're in Exodus 34, 5. The Lord came down in a cloud, stood with him, and proclaimed his name. The Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth. Y'all, our God is most naturally a loving and gracious God. His anger is but for a moment. His love lasts in eternity. And y'all, as we think about who this God is, who this spouse is, because the Bible uses that, we are united to God, right? We're the bride of Christ. Who is this God that we're united to, that we will spend not only our lives but eternity with? He is a merciful God. He's a merciful God. How easy is it for you to believe in God's mercy, for you specifically? I read a book one time, the pastor is saying, the way we think of God, there's a lot of ways to kind of reveal it. You know how you take tests sometimes, tests online, and it tells you what kind of character you are from some movie or book series, there's all the kind of cheesy tests, or there's personality tests. It's like, what type of person are you? And so you take these tests. Well, there's a couple of tests that you can see what your view of God is. And this one pastor suggested, here's a test for you. Some of y'all know the story about Peter, right as Jesus is being put on trial. And Peter's like, I am never going to betray you, ever. I'm never going to betray you, Jesus. And Jesus is like, yeah, you will. And Peter's like, no, I will never betray you. Even if everyone else falls away, I won't. right? Peter's that kind of guy. He's fiery. He's like, I'm never going to do it. I'm good. I promise you, I'm faithful. No sooner is Jesus arrested, Peter's before the fire, and then there's all these people gathered around. It's a campfire, and they're kind of, he's waiting outside as Jesus is on the inside, being beaten and mocked and false trial, unjust. And 3 times people in the crowd point out, like, hey, I know you. You're one of Jesus' disciples. No, I'm not. I never knew him. 3 times he denies Jesus. And then the 3rd time he denies him, the rooster crows. And it says, in that moment, Luke's account says, Jesus looked at Peter. This pastor said, what do you think Jesus was feeling in that moment? What did the expression on his face show? If you are putting yourselves in Peter's shoes and you're looking at Jesus, what's Jesus doing? What's he feeling right now? You've just betrayed him in his greatest moment of need. Is he angry? Does his face show anger? Does his face show primarily hurt, sadness? This pastor said, that's always how I've seen that story. It's always how I've heard that story. But what if Jesus is looking at Peter with deep love and compassion? Pastor goes on to say, we know that that's what Jesus was doing because the very next time Jesus meets Peter, the thing they talk about is love. Peter, do you love me? Jesus said. Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Our God is a merciful and loving God. Our sins don't keep us from him. His mercy is more. He's a faithful God. He's a merciful God. And he is a holy God. He's a holy God. Exodus 33:3. But I will not go with you because you're a sick enough people. Otherwise, I might destroy you on the way. Might destroy you on the way. On the one hand, he's being merciful, but on the other hand, you see his wrath, you see his holiness in the face of sin. We talked about this last week. Also, in Exodus 34:7, we see that he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children and grandchildren to the 4th generation. Verse 10. And the Lord responded, look, I am making a covenant. In the presence of all the people, I will perform wonders that I have never been done in the whole world, in any earth or any nation. Observe what I command you today. Our God is a merciful God, but he is a holy God as well. And we see his holiness in his wrath against sin. We see his holiness in the commands that he gives his people. He gives 10 commandments. He is giving them a very clear way to live because he's a holy God and he's calling his people to live holy lives. In a relationship, in human relationships, one of the ways that we love one another is by becoming a little bit more like that person. All right? Our human relationships, healthy human relationships, influence and impact one another. Right? A good friendship, both people will make the other person a better person, right? And a good parenting relationship, the children are influenced by the parents. In a good marriage relationship, the husband and wife, they're influenced by one another. And sacrifices are made for one another, right? You give up things for the relationship. God is calling us as his people to give up our sinful ways that are displeasing him and to become more like him. God makes demands on our lives. He calls us to change, right? I've always been told that preaching is about comforting the afflicted, right? Makes sense, right? But also afflicting the comfortable. Sometimes we need God to afflict us, to challenge us, to make us uncomfortable, to convict us of sin so that we will change and be more like him. God calls us to inconvenience ourselves often in life. Maybe some of us are holding on to an area in our life, right? Maybe some of us are holding on to a sin, a behavior, a habit, a relationship that we know is not glorifying to the Lord. I heard a pastor say one time, if Jesus were to come in the room and sit down with you and say, hey, let's talk about it. And that's all he said. Let's talk about it. Would you know what he wanted to talk about? Right? Let's talk about it. We need to talk. Let's talk about Now again, let's stay on this, an example. But what's the tone of Jesus as he's saying that? Is it a tone of judgment? Is it a tone of condemnation? Is it a tone of bringing shame to you? Or is it a tone of compassion that wants to help you change? You see, God not only calls us to change, but he's committed to helping us become more holy. Our God, our present God, is a holy God. But also, look at this. Our God is our greatest blessing. Our present God is our greatest blessing. All right, y'all, this is so interesting. This is so fascinating. All right, so think about this. The people have been given a promise by God. All right, and y'all, the promised land, like, this is a big deal, right? Like, ever since God called Abraham, he said, hey, I've got a promised land for you, and it'll be a great land. It'll be a land flowing with milk and honey. It'll be a land of blessing. It'll be a land of peace. I've got a promised land coming for you, Abraham. And that passage, that message, that promise was passed on generation, generation, generation. All right? I don't know, what's the last time you had something big that you were looking forward to? Maybe it was a wedding day, right? Maybe it was a promotion. Maybe it was a vacation. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the birth of a family member. This is that you were looking forward to it. You're so excited. Think about the amount of emphasis that you put on that. Y'all, that is the kind of emphasis, that is the kind of expectation and hope that the Israelites had about the promised land. And here, this amazing promised land, God says, okay, I'm going to give it to you. But I'm not going to be there. Basically, God's saying to his people, hey, I'm going to give you every heart's desire. I'm going to pour out blessings upon you. But I'm not going to be there. Here's my question, fam. Would you take that deal? Every one of your heart's desires. I'm going to bless you. You get joy, you get provision, you get safety, you get comfort, you get love, you get relationships, you get your heart's desire. But God says, but I'm not in it. What this does, it's another test for us. It's another test to ask ourselves, hey, are we more interested in the stuff that God gives us? Or are we more interested in God himself? Y'all, ask yourself that question. What would you take? Are you more excited about God's blessings? Or are you more excited about God himself? Now look, we've been hard on Israel, right? They rebelled, and it's kind of hard to understand, but look at how they respond. In verse 4, when the people heard the bad news, they mourned and they didn't put on their jewelry. You're like, well, that's a weird detail. Well, you got to remember the jewelry, right? We talked about this last week if you were here. The jewelry was significant because the jewelry both signified God's blessings for his people, but the jewelry also signified how they made the golden calf. The golden calf came from their jewelry. And so the people are saying, hey, we're done with God's blessings if he's not in it. They're mourning. Moses himself is mourning. You know, in some ways, God said to Moses, hey, you're going to be the star, right? You get to continue to be the leader, and I promise you now, you're going to go where I've told you you're going to go. You get success, Moses. Moses says, no. He argues with God. You know, the first time he argued with God on a mountain, right? It was at the burning bush, and Moses said to God, no, I will not go. I don't want to do this thing. Moses and God replied to Moses, but I'll be with you. Now he's saying, hey, I don't want to do this thing unless you will be with me. I'm not interested in taking a step, God, unless you are with me. Why? Because just like the people, Moses saw that their greatest blessing wasn't this promised land. The greatest blessing was God himself. Verse 14, we see this. After Moses is arguing with God, saying, wait, would you please show me your favor? And then verse 14, and he replied, and God replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. So here's what God's saying. Moses, I'm done with the people, but I will go with you. I'll be present with you, singular. That's a singular you in the Hebrew. Moses like, no. Verse 15, if your presence does not go, Moses responded to him, don't make us go from here. Don't make us go from here. Moses saw that the promised land wasn't a place, it was a person. So family, again, the question is, what gets you so excited? Is it the stuff that God gives you, or is it God himself? And I want to say this, despite the fact that as a pastor, some would say I'm a professional Christian, despite the fact that I take seriously my relationship with the Lord, despite the fact that the Lord has taught me so much on my journey, y'all, I still struggle with this. I still struggle with this. And a lot of times, I'll be honest, God, really what I want is peace. Oh, and your presence is nice too. God, really what I want is I want a relief. I just don't want to suffer, God. And, you're all right, So here's the invitation, family. What if we spent more time praying, Lord, would you change my heart so that I would love you more than the circumstances in my life? Y'all, that's a powerful prayer. That's a powerful prayer. Lord, help me to love you more than the stuff you give me. Our God, our present God, is a blessing. But our present God is also a counselor. Look at this, verse 7. Now Moses took a tent, he pitched it outside the camp at a distance from the camp. He called it the tent of meeting. Anyone who wanted to consult the Lord would go to the tent of meeting that was outside the camp. Now, so what's happening here? So again, because of the people's sin, God has said, hey, I'm no longer in your midst. I'm going to be outside the camp. He's not fully abandoning his people, but he's like, you need distance from me, right? We've talked about that. In his wrath and his holiness and his mercy, he moves outside the camp, but Moses is allowed to go. Again, we talked about this last week. Moses is the mediator. He goes on behalf of the people. So God's love and his connection with the people is still maintained through the bridge of Moses. So Moses comes to people, but not only that, God is so gracious and merciful and generous that even when the people they need to consult the Lord, when they have questions, when they have concerns, when they have fears, when they have worries, they go to Moses, and Moses seeks the Lord on their behalf. See what kind of kind, loving, and present God we serve. The Bible calls Jesus the wonderful counselor. And of course, we know that the wonderful counselor is present with us as Christians through the Holy Spirit. So you have this God, this present God is with you to give you counsel, to give you advice, to give you guidance. Because y'all, this is a scary and confusing world. And sometimes we need the Lord to speak to us through his word, through his spirit, and through the body as we listen to one another. Our present God is a counselor, but our present God is also personal. Look at verse 11. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks with his friend. Y'all, we know that Moses had direct access to God. When it says face to face, this isn't literal as if God had a face that was viewing Moses. This is talking about the personal, intimate relationship that they had. In fact, just a moment, we're going to read that you can't even see God's face. You're going to die. So Moses is not seeing God's face like we have a face. This is personal. This is intimate. This is a close friendship. Our present God is a personal God. And we see at this point, the tent of meeting is a symbol of God's personal presence, but also the distance, right? And the tabernacle later, when that's built, it's a symbol of God's personal presence, but it's also distance. You can't go in. But now, never forget, the curtain is torn, and we have direct access to God. An Israelite living under the old covenant would be shocked and astounded by what's happening this morning. The direct access that we have to God. The priesthood of believers is what some of the reformers said in the 15th century. We're all priests. We have direct access to God. We don't need a human mediator because we have Jesus, our divine mediator. We have direct access to God. He's a personal God. And so, just as Hebrews encourages us, we need to enter in. Enter in Talked about the marriage analogy earlier, and how sad would it be to enter into a marriage and then from day one never enter into the beauty of that relationship, but to stay always and forever distant. Family, we have an intimate relationship with the God of the universe, and he desires to be involved in the details of your life. I've had some people say, yeah, but God has got so much going on. How does he care about this little thing that happened to me at work? He does. But he's got so many prayer requests that he's answering. How could he, care about my grades in school? How could he care about how I'm feeling? How could he care about my mental health? He does. He does. Our God is a personal God. The next God is a glorious God. Moses says, please let me see your glory. This is verse 18 of 33. Moses, and God said, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see my face and live. But God says yes. He said, here's the plan. Here's God's plan for how Moses can see. And what Moses is asking for is to see more of God's unfiltered glory, right? It's kind of like this, right? You can kind of see the sun by how it shows itself, right? You can even kind of see it in your periphery, but we all have been taught from an early age, you don't look directly at the sun. It's just too powerful, right? Kind of what Moses is asking for is, God, let me see your unfiltered glory. And God says, if I grant you your wish, you're going to die. However, here's what I can do, okay? There's a rock, and I want you to stand behind this cleft in the rock. And so that rock will protect you. And then when my glory passes by, which means as I'm departing, right, the word here in Hebrew is as I pass by, it means as I'm departing, you can kind of see the after effects of my glory. So the rock will protect you, and the fact that I'm passing away from you, that will protect you, and then I will cover you with my hand. In some sense, God still has to filter his glory from Moses. The rock's not enough. The fact that God's glory is diminishing as he's passing away is not enough. He still has to protect Moses so Moses doesn't die when he sees his glory. What's the point? Now, our God is a glorious God. When you see him face to face, nothing else will matter. When you see him face to face, you will be in such awe. When you see his majesty, as you stand face to face with him, as he returns or we're in heaven, everything else will melt away by comparison because the weight of his glory is too much for us to possibly comprehend. But just knowing that is helpful. Because knowing that there is an immeasurable weight of glory that is waiting for us helps us to bear up in the comparatively minor weight of suffering. That yet feels real, it feels heavy, doesn't feel light. But we need to remember that through all the heartache, through all the discouragement, through all the news reports that you hear that just bring you down, not again. Throughout all of that, you need to know that our God is a glorious God. And he is doing glorious work. And he is not done. But finally, we end here. Our God, our present God, is a transformative God. Moses, some of you know the story. Moses interacts with God. He sees his glory. God speaks to Moses. And when he comes down the mountain, his face, his skin is shining. Moses, it says, the Aaron and the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near to him. Moses is forever changed by his encounter with God. Our present God is a transformative God. He loves us just as we are, but his love for us is so great that he refuses to leave us there. He is at the work of transforming us, of making us new. For his glory, for our good, and for the good of others around us. The world around us, our neighborhoods, our community, our city, needs us to be a transformed people. And God is hard at work. And as we've said recently, our job is to join him in the work that he's already doing in us. Our God is a faithful God. He is a merciful God. He is a holy God. He is our blessing. He's our counselor. He's a personal God. He's a glorious God. And he is a transformative God. And in all of these ways, we get to experience him through the person of Jesus Christ. That's a good segue, actually, to our Lord's table today. Because as wonderful as the Lord is, if we don't have the mediator, Jesus Christ, he is too much for us. In many ways, Jesus himself is like the rock that protects Moses. Moses wants to see, he longs to see, he has to see God's glory, but it's just too much for him, and so he needs something to protect him. Jesus himself is the rock of ages that protects us from being destroyed by God's amazing glory. He is our mediator, and he went up to the cross, and as he gathered together with his disciples before that night that he was betrayed, he broke the bread and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." And then he took the cup. He said, "This is my blood of the covenant poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." And in doing so, Jesus was teaching his disciples something, but he was also giving a lasting ordinance, a lasting sacrament for all of his people throughout history. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 that every time we do this, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Which means we are reminding ourselves and we're reminding others that our hope is in Jesus Christ, what he has done. Our hope is in the living rock, the rock of ages, who protects us from God's glory, but still enables us to experience God's glory. Family, the reality is that you and I are sinners, and sinners have no place with a holy God, which is why Jesus died on the cross, so that the consequences of your sin will be forgiven, and so that your sins go to Jesus. He experiences death, and his righteousness comes to you, and you get to experience life and forgiveness in Jesus Christ.